I'm Sarah Gerritsen, Director of Programs for Executive Mosaic. Welcome and thank you so much for attending today's webinar, A Blueprint for a Modern, Data-Driven Approach to Capture Management. And a big thank you to our sponsor, TechnoMile, for hosting. Before we get started, I'm going to go over a couple of quick housekeeping items. Speaker biographies and other resources can be found in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. And if you have questions for us here at GovCon Wire or for the speakers throughout today's program, you can submit them through the Q&A chat box. Today we have Mick Fox and Kevin Brancato, TechnoMile, discussing key technology trends impacting the GovCon sector, along with the best practices that forward-thinking government contractors should consider including in their capture management program. Mick Fox is the Chief Operating Officer at TechnoMile. In this capacity, Mick is responsible for operations, strategic execution, customer experience, sales, marketing, and human resources. Mick is an industry veteran with more than 25 years of experience in the government contracting space. Kevin Brancato is the SVP of Product Strategy at TechnoMile, where he guides the company's vision and strategy to deliver an innovative cloud platform for government contractors that fuses data and leverages leading-edge technologies to help companies improve efficiency, gain actionable insights, and mitigate risk throughout the entire capture-to-contract process, resulting in more contract wins. So Mick and Kevin, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining Kevin and I in this discussion. And Kevin, I cannot tell you how excited I am to actually get to speak to you face to face, because for years, represented here amongst the both of us, I've spent most of my career on the government contracting side and having to compete for dollars in the government space and trying to figure out how do I build a system of people, processes, and tools to pursue this business. And most of the time I'd reach out to people like you who, would tell me from an analytical perspective, what's going on out there in the market. And I was always having to figure out how do I take your information and put it into the knowledge that I was using. And then now sitting on this side, you and I sitting now here together, which I'm extremely excited we're sitting here together, to try and figure out, not only for TechnoMile, but for all of the people out there who are working on this, how do you actually go about evolving your systems? So, represented here, you have people who have pursued government business, you have people who have analyzed government business, and now you have people who are working to actually try and build a blueprint for a modern data-driven approach. So, Kevin, thank you for joining us, and I very much look forward to this conversation because we've actually been having this over many years. So with that, what I'd like to start off by asking you, Kevin, is the whole title of this discussion is about a data-driven approach to capture management. So now you've sat most of your life on the analytical side of things. So just if you wouldn't mind, kind of set the stage for us. What have you been seeing out there when it comes to capture management in the industry?
Thanks, and thank you, Mick. This is going to be a wonderful conversation. In the industry, what I've been providing for lots of people for a long time is intelligence out of data. People have been trying to get as much as possible out of what's out there in the marketplace. They really want to drive capture into the modern world. And I think what I want to run through today is exactly what a modern platform can do. What I found, though, especially in the last couple of years, is that people weren't getting everything they wanted out of the data. They needed something else. There was something missing. So, that's why I'm here at TechnoMile, because I think we have the pieces that we can put together, because there's all that public data that's been providing, but I think there is a lot of private data. There's a lot of things about processes, about the specific situations companies find them in, and there is just a huge amount of information that is not being exploited today that we think there's actually money being left on the table because people are not properly using the external data. They're not using their private internal data. They're not connecting them and not empowering their people. That's what I see out in the marketplace are people who really want to lead their businesses into the modern world, but they're using legacy practices that we need to enhance. So let's go dive right in. Let's talk about where we've been and where we're going. So I'm excited to go through this. It's not going to be a big, long history lesson, but these are some stylized facts about where capture has been yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And what you see is that not too long ago, only the largest opportunities were run through a real formal capture management process. That's because it was really expensive. You have to have large teams of people scouring all sorts of data and pulling it together. And that you can't do for everything. You can only do if you have a streamlined process that really makes a lot of sense. And so people would go into FPDS or other large sources and try to take all the information and sort of put it together. But it worked. It worked for very large deals. And I think that was the impetus for trying to apply it to where we see it today. And where we see it today is capture teams spending a lot of time on a lot of opportunities, much more opportunities that have gone through the pipeline. And there are better tools out there to get the data. And they're really trying to put things into standardized, online, digitized processes, at least on their capture management teams, that they're going to put it into a standard CRM or something like that. At least all the data now is being pushed into some place. It's not just in one person's brain. It's in many persons' brains. It's in a lot of file share services. It's in all these other places, and people are collaborating together. And that's where we see it now. People are capture management professionals leading things, though, sense that something can change now. And what they sense is that there's technology out there that can mine the public data and mine their internal data, and they're looking and asking us, what can we do to automate a lot of these processes? What can we do to get intelligence out of the contracts that we've won and the ones that we've lost, out of all the connections that we've made? What can we do? And right now, they're struggling, and the senior BD folks, they're asking questions, they're getting answers, but it's still very costly. And we want to see going forward, I think, is capture processes that are extensions of what you have now. But basically, all opportunities can go through an automated process, that you're taking information from your online systems, figuring out what's important, and then asking and demanding that it ask questions of every opportunity that goes through the pipeline. And so you're not missing anything. What happens then? I think you see a change in the nature of capture. You get smaller teams with more exceptional people being able to make bigger decisions.
You know, Kevin, the getting to sit on this side of the table, which I now have gotten to for the last 4 years, that is the one thing that I've seen that's really starting to separate companies out there. And it's going to be the majority of the rest of our discussion here today, which is what I call the democratization of capture, the democratization of data. That, you know, when I worked at Lockheed Martin, like you said, only the really big deals, we had a team of competitive intelligence people who they had their spreadsheet, they had their access database, and they put a bunch of information to it. But only the privileged few got to go ask them a question. Only if I was going after a deal that was greater than $100 million did I actually get a response from that team. So the one thing that I've seen, and you know, we're going to go over it here with the blueprint, is companies, the best practices that we are seeing, the companies whose win rates are above industry average. Those are the folks who have begun to figure out, how do I democratize this data? So I think, you know, you said, you know, this is your opinion. I think it's the opinion that we're seeing in industry, that somehow, you know, it's Moneyball, right? It's trying to get all this data and all these analytics into the right hands.
Well, you mentioned $100 million. I am shocked at the number of companies that don't even maintain records of opportunities they've been on and lost at $100 million. Just absolutely stunned. And the next time a recompete comes around, they don't have any of it, and a lot of their people have left. And it's astonishing. So they're not even at square one yet. But at this time, let's ask a question to everyone and see if we can get a poll coming through. Has your organization developed a blueprint for a data-driven approach to capture management? And we don't have yes or no. We have a very more sensible set of answers. You haven't considered it. You've had internal discussions. You have a project in place to implement one, or you really do have a modern blueprint. We'd be excited to know that.
So we're going to take a pause and let you all interact with us and be able to click on some of these radio buttons. And in a few moments, we'll click to see what type of answers we're getting. So please interact with the system and click on one of those radio buttons.
So in the meantime, I'm really excited. So I'm looking for how to describe what it is that's happening here. And I realize there's just so much information out there, and that a lot of folks are trying to build a system themselves internally. And they're going to have a real hard time doing that. So
no, absolutely. So people can build a system themselves. Yeah. I mean, obviously, we're TechnoMile. We have a system, and we'll talk about that. But people can build a system for themselves. And that's part of what we're going to go through here is what should you consider when building that? What is the blueprint that they should be leveraging? So there's a lot of customers we go into who have worked to build a system themselves. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah. So about half have submitted, so let's go through. So across the board, has your organization developed a blueprint? About a fifth haven't considered it. Almost half have had internal discussions about it, and a quarter have a project in place to implement one, and amazingly, the 8% have a modern blueprint in place.
And I know this is a small subset of the industry on the phone with us, but this is exactly in line with what we're seeing out there. So that means that 50%, almost 75% of the folks, this is top of mind to them. So that's exciting to see, because that is exactly what we're seeing out in the industry right now as a whole.
So we can give you a blueprint. Let's do it. So this is how to build a modern capture cloud in 4 easy steps. And so, as I mentioned earlier, there's public data and there's private data. And you really want to understand how these fit together. And a lot of folks out there now are really good at step number one, that they have a process in place that ingests, cleans, connects, and even takes what's important out of that data for their companies. Either they do it internally or they go through externally. And they have a sense of how to take that information and put it into their capture plans that absolutely require it. Because all along the step, when you're looking for an opportunity or for a wider strategy, you're trying to formulate where you need to fit into the market, where your key capabilities are relative to other things. And having that core data is critical for a lot of companies.
So what data? So first of all, what's public? When you say public, what's public? And then go a step below that. Like, what types of data are you talking about?
So in the public realm, it's broadly, it's amazingly in the federal marketplace. It's one of the only markets where you basically know a huge amount of information at the transaction level about what you and your competitors are doing. So it's every historical contract that's out there, what your competitors have won, how many people have bid, what the market's in, who the customer is, what are the key characteristics of each of those opportunities in the past. And there are two main data sources. There's historical contracts, like FPDS, and then there's opportunity information through a bunch of sources like SAM or procurement forecasts or the like. So you have a top-line aggregate view of where your slice of the market has been and where it's going. There's a lot of effort involved in making sure you only get the right slice that's important to you. A lot of companies have done that already. So to go from there, what the real critical part is not that public data, but understanding the private data. So a lot of folks probably in this audience don't think of their capture management process as the entire purpose of being to provide data, but it effectively is from this perspective. Folks, to get the maximum P-win on an opportunity, have set up capture processes and are requiring their teams to use them. They're set up contract management systems and require their contract teams to use them for the systemization of the process. And you have to have that in place. What was really important is not just the process, but it's using it and then understanding what sort of information you need to put into there to get the most out of the system. And people have really thought about it as, oh, I want the most efficient system, or I need to ensure I'm lowering costs or other sorts of efficiencies. But from a broader company perspective, it's not just the running the system. It's every single component. So what is private data? It's your emails. It's your meeting notes. It's your call notes. It's the documents. It's the preparation you've made for a color team meeting. It's the report that comes out of it. It's all that pieces of information, this huge amount of context that you have internally about how you go to market, about how you approach opportunities. This is critical information because you know what you've won and you know what you've lost and you know why. And it's all sitting there in two places. It's sitting there in these the brains of all the people who work for you, and it's sitting on this file share service. But it's very difficult to leverage either of those to go back for every single opportunity.
So Kevin, when you write here, set up and use a growth management tool or contract, are you simply talking about a CRM? I mean, there's a lot of CRMs out there in use. Is that really what you're just talking? Is it, hey, set up a CRM and you're good?
It's a start. A CRM is basically going to just say, okay, well, here's a generic process for you to follow. What I think you really need to set up is a system that understands what you're trying to achieve in business, what your specific processes are, how you organize that, how you interact with clients, and how you take that information and use it, how you manage a contract. It's radically different in the federal space than it is any place else in the complexity of the deals, the timing of the deals. A standard CRM won't cover that. You really need to adapt it to meet the federal market needs.
Very good. I just wanted to make sure, because here this concept of a capture cloud, I had never heard that before. So I was interested in what you meant by that. Okay.
Now, so basically, well, I'm just go through. What I really mean is all these pieces need to fit together, and they need to fit together in a way that it's not seamless, but it's close to it. All these pieces of information need to talk together. And if we go to the next side, what is really important is being able to connect this public data, this view of the wins in the market, with your private data and your contextual information, and being able to create intelligence from that linkage. And right now that happens. Don't get me wrong, that happens. It happens primarily in the minds of senior leadership. They are driving forward, asking the right questions about what are the key capabilities our company has, and can I find a way to make sure we're pursuing the right opportunities? Can I make sure that we're aligning our businesses or finding the right teammates to grow in the marketplace? They're asking the right questions, but it winds up being one-off questions, very difficult to answer. A lot of time is involved in this. They can even set an entire team to go answer a set of questions, set up a new process, build out a new database just to answer one question. And that does happen, and it can be successful. What's happening is those very same people understand this is inefficient, that there's a lot more to happen, and that's what the fourth bullet is that they want to empower everyone else who works for them. And they want everyone to be able to ask these questions. They want everyone to have, in their team, to be able to say, I have a good sense for what our initial P1 might be here, but it would be really great if I had all the data and the context and really understood this. It takes forever to do that unless you have a capture cloud system in place that takes that information and presents it to decision makers in a more sensible fashion. So that's what I'm talking about.
So everybody uses the two letters AI out there. It's a great marketing shtick with that, and they use machine learning. And here we have it in this as well. What exactly do you mean AI ML? How does that help the connection between these two sources of data?
So what has to happen when you've set up your own platform? Remember, these are documents. These are spreadsheets. This is effectively unstructured data. You're asking questions over a crazy amount of data. And you're asking very specific questions. Like when I say AI ML, I want to know, can I assess an opportunity value for my company when an opportunity comes in the pipeline? Not later on. I don't want to have a meeting about it. I want to have this AI ML. You can even think of AI ML in this context as a member of your capture team. Somebody who's answering questions ahead of time as soon as an opportunity goes into a pipeline. It's this automatic generation of information and specific things. And many of you, if you're requiring a capture process, the people who have to enter these opportunities into a system got to fill out form after form after form, as pieces of information, or even if something is shifted from a public database, most of that information is not there. It needs to be generated. And what we're talking about is finding a way to generate that information. So if I go here, there are, again, 2 sets of data. We're going to keep spiraling down into this information so we understand, and we'll get to, in more detail, where this AI ML comes into place. Because I think those specific cases are absolutely critical here.
Perfect.
Okay? And so having both these 2 together is absolutely critical. And there is definitely a lot more information in the market than has ever been out there before. And public data gives you high-level understanding. Remember, if you go to FPDS, what you see are the bids that have been won by everyone. You don't see who bid. You don't see who lost, right? And so there's a limited amount of context there. You see plans that have been executed by agencies. You don't see plans that have never come to fruition by agencies. But that's exactly the sort of data you would see in the private realm. You've had discussions with plenty of customers that are interested in producing something and it doesn't come to fruition. That need is there. That requirement is still there in some form. And that sort of context is absolutely critical. So being able to see what's out in the marketplace and what actually has been executed and what the current needs are in terms of budgets, in terms of even forecasts for new opportunities, and be able to connect that to your previous experience and your team's previous knowledge. This happens mostly now in meetings, right? But if I wanted to run a report right now on a particular customer, for example, and I go into my standard CRM, it's going to pull out a bunch of bulletized things that give me no context. But I think a lot of our clients want to be able to go and say, I want to go into PEO Stride, and I want to understand the key critical requirements that we have learned from our personal meetings with this folks at this agency. That's what I'm talking about by this merging of public and private data. It's real information. But inside of those big documents where you've had a meeting with a high acquisition official, there's no way right now, unless you have developed an AI ML model to extract that key critical piece of information and bring it to the forefront. That's what we're trying to do here. So in terms of high-level spending data, again, we've seen that high-level historical and current opportunities. Everyone has them. There's no advantage in this at this point. Everyone has them and can systematize them. Forecasts and budgets, you have to assume everyone has them. That's table stakes, walking in. All that information is readily available to everyone. What is not available to everyone is that private data and how you're going to extract that information and be able to fill in those gaps where you currently have this process that people need assistance with. So
on the private side, if I can address that a little bit, what I have found is a huge advancement, which I've seen over the last 2 to 3 years. And I think everybody listening that you ought to strongly begin to consider this. And that is in everybody's capture process, we have this, after actions report. Sometimes you do it, sometimes you don't do it. But typically there is somebody sitting on top of the pyramid who's trying to analyze, why did we win this? Why did we lose this? And I do think, and you made this comment earlier, Kevin, the companies that we see that are really hitting their stride and having a greater win rate, they're actually taking the data from the capture process itself. And so there's a recommendation to those listening that I would highly recommend. It is analyze the whole process. We all, love the beloved 6 steps of Shipley now. 57 steps is what the most common number of steps utilized. But there's something to be learned out of each of those stages. Did we do it? And by the way, if we did it, did that lead to a win? So what we have found for those companies that are really hitting their stride here are the ones who are looking at it saying, which capture steps are the most common to our wins? That was doing your competitive analysis at a certain level. did that lead to more wins, or is it just something that we were doing just because we were told we were supposed to do it? Mm-hmm. So we do strongly recommend, and we do see out there, take time to do your win-loss analysis, and down to not just we didn't know the customer well enough. What does that mean? Where in your capture process? Go back and take a look at your capture process, because all that data should be in your capture cloud about, did we do these steps? And if so, how well did we do those steps? Analyzing that, so that way you can start to correlate, hey, this step in our capture process, we should never miss it because it correlates to the highest level of wins within it.
Sure, it's possible to do such an analysis now. If you have a team of half a dozen spend an entire year, you could probably do this on a one-off basis. What we don't want to do is build these things on a one-off basis. You don't want to answer a proposal as if you've never had this information before. You just simply don't want to do these things.
Well, just before we move on, one other thing that you see in here that I do recommend, as part of a blueprint, is the emails and the field reports and everything. You need to have a database where you're collecting that, both structured and unstructured data, because there's a lot of information in there. I always hated the after actions report when we lost, and I'd had a business developer, an account manager, it was like, the customer loves us, the customer loves us. And then you go back and you start doing sentiment analysis on some of the emails that we received, and you notice that the words weren't negative, they just weren't positive. Mm-hmm. So looking back over time and realizing, had we just done some kind of sentiment analysis, take the human being out, take that capture manager or account manager out, whose job it is to say, we have a great relationship, and have a system. And again, we're going back to, leveraging AI, which there are sentiment analyzers out there, and sometimes maybe it's a human being that has to do it, but we do recommend AI. And doing some kind of a sentiment analysis on those emails, because human beings, we tend to read things a certain way, especially if you're really close to it. So this is why, having a database where you are collecting those emails, collecting those field reports, so that way you can really start to see what is the sentiment of this customer. And then over time, you're going to start building a model of what does a good capture look like? What does a good customer relationship look like? What does a good account management look like? So I just want to make sure, as we talk about this private data.
It's very close in some ways to what some folks are doing now, that this standard process of you get an RFP into your shop and you shred it, right? And so you're going to understand, create a matrix, create responsibility, lots of different things are going to go on. But basically, you're going to start taking a detailed analysis. That's the first step. But we're talking about an automated system that's basically going to wind up shredding everything that winds up entering into your pipeline, and then takes that and compares it. That's not an unusual thing. Like AI/ML sounds a little bit daunting to some people, or it sounds not real, but you have the building blocks now. We're turning an RFP shredded. RFP's a set of words and tables. Shredded becomes data, becomes spreadsheets, becomes data that you can then correlate with other pieces. I think it's a lot more humane when you start talking about processes people are already engaged in. What's the next step? And that's what we want to talk about, next step here. And so this gobbledygook of acronyms, AI, ML, NLP for natural language processing, it can help you grow your business in several ways, right? So you can automate repetitive tasks and turn this data into expertise so human beings can make smarter, better decisions. It's not for its own sake. It's for a very specific business purpose. And I want to characterize in more detail the sorts of things that it can do. Because, I know a lot of people have familiarity with the tools of recommendations on YouTube or, a Redfin, and they're very simple. If you've looked at this, why don't you consider this? We're talking something a lot more sophisticated than that, because it's very easy for me, as somebody who's looked at all the historical data, to say, oh, well, your company, it's won 5 deals at CBP worth more than 100 million in NAICS code 541, blah, blah, blah. And let me recommend all those to you. That's easy. Anyone can do that. That's trivial. What I'm really talking about is, can you look inside the statement of work that's been issued there, pull out the key characteristics of that statement of work, now look at your key capabilities and mash them up and score them. Or look at the wins and losses you've had in the past and mash them up with the key capabilities inside an active statement of work.
So what I hear you saying, to make sure that the audience is AI ML, so everybody would love to do what you just said.
Yes.
That is the golden egg, is being able to take all these documents and the unstructured data that's in these documents and do something with it for the analysis. But that's hard.
Yes.
So what I hear you saying is that when you talk about machine language and natural language processing, it's actually leveraging, and those tools are out there today, it's actually leveraging those to let those go in, get the unstructured data, put that data into your company's database. So that way, going back to a slide you showed previously, the other aspects of AI, which is now you can start doing a correlation. So that's ultimately, when you say AI ML in this context, it's let those engines do the work for you to grab all of that data out of those unstructured documents.
I mean, you still need people producing and doing all this work. That doesn't change things. They need
the art of capture is still there.
That has to be there. Yeah. And you want to enable people to do it better. You don't want people hand jamming any data. You'd like a prediction to be in there. They're making an assessment. So one of the things people really like to be able to do is see who my competitors are. What are the closest wins? Well, you should be able to get a contextual recommendation. So what I have on the slide here for people to see is it basically can make AI can do, it does on one thing. It creates statistics, right? AI is basically statistics, right? But what can you do with it? You can do things that help you fill in quantitative gaps and then make recommendations, sort of qualitative enhancements. So what I really want to talk about is this is not pie in the sky. These are prediction models that can make calculations that you need done now. So you can create an opportunity value, a date value, based on not just, oh, okay, I see opportunities like this look like more than 100 million. Well, no, actually, you can take your work share based on what those sort of characteristics are. Or, for example, a date figure. You might know that it takes a certain amount of time from when a initial RFI is released to when proposals are finally accepted. But I'm pretty sure you don't have it in detail by the type of market. You could have it by an agency because that's a simple field, but you don't have it by key characteristics. What I'm talking about is a much more realistic enhancement of those sorts of estimates. Right now, you have people making those assessments. You could also look at maybe you get to a point where the machine understands, oh, okay, I see this sort of opportunity out there. How much money should I be spending pursuing it? Based on all the other characteristics I've seen, well, based on my value and how much money I have spent in the past on these sorts of opportunities, don't spend more than this because it's not likely to be helpful. It's a quantitative set of figures, an initial P-win set of estimate, or a market or revenue forecast, looking at the entire portfolio of opportunities. These are statistical measures that are the outcome of the process after you've done a lot of that extraction. On the qualitative side, again, one of the things I think really needs to happen is that a whole bunch of opportunities need to be assessed. Not just, okay, I'm going to pre-filter based on my NAICS code. You might have a portion of work in something that you've never even seen. And we see that with a lot of sort of even like a base management contract, where there'd be a huge number of other potential opportunities inside of it that are not being analyzed at this time. Well, you want this engine to be able to go in and identify those capabilities for you. Or, that's sort of opportunity focused or market focused, but it could be internal. I mean, right now, I think you have a good sense as somebody who's done this work, who is the most successful capture team leader, right? Somebody who's won, but maybe you're missing something. We're all missing something, that somebody's really good at this sort of deal. Well, I think you should be able to pick that out. That's when you said Moneyball earlier. That's the sort of thing you want to be able to find out. Who's good in what situation at what cost? And that's what these calculations are for.
So it's a lot of data, and that's daunting, right? So let's spend some time then as you start digging through this, talking about the data, because AI, ML, great technology, and love to talk. In fact, we may talk a little bit more about the AI and the ML capabilities. And by the way, to be clear to the audience, you don't have to build those. Those engines already exist. Just choosing the right one. So the complexity, the daunting aspects of it, the AI, the ML engines that are out there, you can grab one and leverage one against your data. But let's talk about...
Well, before that, there are actually a huge number of AI startups right now. I think I've read an article yesterday, there are more than 10,000 across the globe. And leveraging different aspects. They call be using the same core engines. They're talking about applications in certain areas. That's the stage at which we're at now, where photo recognition is really good. In fact, I might challenge some people to go submit old photographs in a publicly available like Google or Facebook and see if their engine can recognize people who have 20 or 30 years ago and that they've aged. They can. The engines are really, really good at facial recognition. There are tons of enhancements that have been made over the past few years where the accuracy level has gone up dramatically.
So, one thing, if we can move on here to the next, is what I've discovered as we've done this is we'll go into, now I sit where I sit on the TechnoMile side, we'll go into a company and talk about everything that you just have spent the last 30 minutes talking about. And what I have found really interesting is this core set of data you're talking about, which is account data, spending data, opportunity and pursuit data, which you need all of that. And then there's the art side of it, is how is your company pursuing it? What we have found is that once you have this blueprint in place, I know today's discussion is all about a data-driven approach to capture management. What we've actually found is that's the same data portfolio management. So when we go into a client who's utilizing our system, they will ask, should we be pursuing cybersecurity versus base management? And ultimately, I'm like, well, let's go to the data. Do you have the capabilities to even think that you can go do cyber? So to your point about there's a lot of hidden gems inside of these contracts, that's what we're talking about when you have a system like that. The pipeline management you've talked about, the account management. The point is that we wanted to point out is that this data that we're talking about, that you've spent some time really starting to dig into, it isn't just useful for one part of growth, for one part of business development, which is the capture process. It can be used in all aspects of growth. So that was the point of trying to make sure everybody listening, understood, is that this construct that we're about ready to leave you with, kind of a blueprint here in a second. Once you have that in place, you can leverage it for everything that is growth across your company. And then that's when I'm in there talking to different VPs at BD, different CIOs, different CEOs. This is kind of the aha moment, is that I need this data regardless for all aspects of the company.
Yeah. So when let me think about this for a second, because it's an informational advantage, right? It's your own company's information about your front end and back end processes, everything across the board. It's not being utilized now. So I just started at TechnoMile. I'm going to give a good example. And I really want to understand exactly what's going on where. I'm really fortunate that you had a set of processes in place that recorded this information. And I'm a reasonably smart guy. I can go pick apart things. But I had to spend a lot of time going to understand the actual situation at hand. Because there's nothing out there other than human beings really smart doing their jobs who can try to explain things to me. But I had to go in and ask real serious, tough questions about everything across the board, about who's being helped and how and why. And fortunately, everything is documented. But right now, basically all the files and everything here, not just here, but everywhere, is searchable in a very primitive way. And what I want to explain to people is that you're actually able to search in a much more sophisticated way. That's what AI/ML is supposed to do. You have to know the sorts of questions. You really have to design the engine up front to be able to ask those sorts of questions. But once you've done this, it's a much more complicated search. Now, I'm not talking like a complicated Boolean search. Give me these 55 keywords and this makes and this. No, you want to be able to ask straightforward questions and get straightforward answers about the things that we saw on the previous slide. Which sort of opportunities are something that we should pursue, even if we're not in that market right now? That's the sort of thing you're really interested in. And in terms of boosting other business functions, right? This is what I mentioned earlier about who should be in charge of a certain pursuit. Well, in the end, a human being has to make that decision. And virtually every single step of the way, a human being needs to make a decision. What we're talking about is informing and helping people make those decisions, not replacing those people. Because you would never trust an AI to make any decision like that.
So let's go to the blueprint here, the next
the
next slide here.
So this ties it all together on one slide. We wanted to have a tear sheet. I think we actually were going to make this into an actual formal blueprint, but it was impossible to read. So what do you want to do? These are the 4 steps along the way, right? So just to sum up, you really need to, on the front end, customize your market and pipeline. You really want to know what's going on. A lot of folks are doing that now. As we mentioned before, it's a bunch of historical spending data, such as FPDS and USA spending, and then the need to understand the context. So who's actually your competition? So it's not always obvious that you're up against a much larger competitor because they've been bought out. You need to know that. Your agency, too, you need to understand what they're doing in context. And what's really hard here is the contracts, making sure you understand what's been on what, and small business status. So that sort of information, again, I say before, is basic, and you need to have it rolling in. And for an opportunity pipeline, you need to be able to have these all in one place as well. So what you really want is all that information sorted for you in the place where you like it. The second part is what we mentioned earlier. You want to have all the information about you undertaking your business also in one place. So your pipeline of opportunities and all the things that you have done to try to pursue them, including the emails and the meeting notes. You need all these in one place so you can get the information out of them that you need. And then for qualification, there's a lot of time and effort that's put into gate reviews, into these color team meetings. And I know that's part of the process. I'm not sure that companies are really getting all the value they need out of it, because it appears that they're just basically making all that effort, putting it together, and then sort of dropping the document someplace. All that stuff, if you're not taking the next step, you might as well just print it and put it into a filing cabinet, because it doesn't matter if it's electronic or not, you're not getting value out of it. And then you want your wins and losses. So one thing that maybe not be clear here is that when you shred an RFP, that's a piece of information. But when you have the management of a contract, and you've taken all that information after the fact, all the mods, all the interactions you've had after the fact, that's key intelligence too. What's the difference? Well, I think you can tell that Mick and I, obviously we say, for example, prepared for this briefing, but our preparation is not the same as the execution. And that's what you need to know, that execution history is also very important to you. And then the last 2 parts here, to get that value out of it, you really want to structure that private data and connect it to the public data. And that has to be done in a secure environment. We didn't touch on security all that much, but it's absolutely essential. Your intellectual capital needs to be protected. Again, it's your informational advantage. You have a responsibility to your clients, responsibility to everyone, but it's also your key business advantage. So that needs to stay secure.
So a couple of technical aspects to this, and then I'm going to address 2 questions that are out there. And we are reaching the point of the webinar where we'd love to take questions that are out there. So let me talk to the technical aspect Evan was just referencing and then answer these 2 questions. So technically, a lot of the information that's on the left, you can retrieve that information via the application interfaces, the APIs that are out there. So you can, if you want, bring all this information in and put it into your own database.
And some people doing it very successfully.
Yes. Yeah, we wouldn't recommend that simply because it's a ton of information at that point. We recommend leveraging the APIs, either ones that are fee-based or they do have some APIs that are out there for these. But what you really do need is you do need to have the data of the team, the data of your company in a database, both in a structured format, if that's possible, but also unstructured. So really making sure you have the database for yourself to monitor your capture process. You have to have that in place and all the data elements that go there. Leveraging an API and mapping that to the publicly available data. And then once you have that, then you can begin leveraging the AI and machine learning aspects of it, which then leads to some questions that are out there. I'm actually going to go, I think, in reverse order here. Helene says, this sounds great, but it may make me obsolete. Helene, what I would submit to you is the capture manager, the best capture managers that I've ever gotten to work with are the smartest, most intellectually sound individuals I've ever met. And so the people who get this are the ones who are less interested in the drudgery of capture, which is the collection of the data and doing that query, and the ones who love the art of the capture, the ones who understand, now that I have all this information, how does my company go about winning this deal? There is no tool out there, no tool. TechnoMile can't develop a tool that's going to tell you exactly how to win that opportunity, because that's the nuance. That's the intellectual capacity that a capture manager is paid to have. So I would submit to you, I'm not eliminating anybody's job. This AI ML is not eliminating any job. What it's actually doing is it's allowing those individuals to be more effective, to be able to take a look at this information and say, okay, based upon historical information in this company, what we really win when we focus on this, which then I'm going to relate this to the previous, there's a question right before this that says it's all about the thinking. And I could not agree, trying to get to the gentleman who actually, I think it was a gentleman who asked this, Peter asked this. Peter, you could not be more right, and that's what I'm trying to get to, is that I know we've talked a lot today about data structures. We've talked a lot today about AI and machine learning. I hope what the audience is taking away is today, and I'm going to go all the way back to Kevin's first slide. Today, most of that data that we've been talking about resides in the brains of, I see Dennis Boykin just asked a question. I've known Dennis for years, and it resides in a person's brain like a dentist, somebody who's really, really senior, knows what they're doing. That's where it resides. And that makes dentists extremely valuable. But as you're trying to build out your organization, you're not going to have a cabinet full of dentists. You're going to have a couple people that are high potential folks who would have never done this before. And so how do you enable them? You need to take all of this knowledge that you have, that your team has, and get it into a system that assists that individual when you're not there. So if you're not there, how does that person know that they should be looking at subcontracts of like and kind types of pursuits? So ultimately, what you're hearing from us is, if you put this in place, it actually allows the collaboration and the teamwork and the intellectual capacity of your team to be the focus and not the collection of the data.
I don't want people creating charts for their own sake. Like, that data should be ready to go. I don't want people, the collaboration aspect is really important, but if you have to just put it down and you already have it someplace else, you shouldn't have to retype it. Those sorts of things it's a huge amount of time and effort along the way, doing rather menial things. Now, some people like me like doing menial things in terms of research. But would you really trust, if you've seen an opportunity and the AI spits back, actually you got a 5% P-win, but it's in an agency you're doing really well in, and it has key characteristics that your company is pursuing, what it does, it helps you think about it, right? Maybe you really want to know the context. You want to know the reason why such a decision was made, and maybe it's faulty, but maybe it has insight that will be helpful for you to go gauge. And it takes the time you would spend doing research and focuses it on key differences. And so I think the idea is, it sounds like what we're trying to is just destroy the capture process as it is today. What we really want to do is enhance it as much as possible. Have people waste as little time as possible, focus on the key questions, and get challenged, because often people will make an estimate of something and, oh, that's good enough. Like, that's an estimate, and somebody else doesn't really have any more information. Well, you would want everyone on the team to have as much information as possible. If you're saying, okay, we need to come to a conclusion about, the government doesn't say how much this is worth. We need to come to a conclusion. Well, where are you going to start? You're going to just do back-of-the-envelope calculations. Let's say it's, okay, well, we need this sort of server capability. It's going to be very, very difficult to assess that. If it were just labor hours, then maybe you can get something okay. But it's possible that it's really difficult to come to these unless you have guidance that's bringing forward other information for you to analyze.
And there's a question here from David, and it's like, why are you going after attacking the capture process? I would love to hear, David, maybe a little bit more what you mean by that question, but I'm going to interpret, number one, because I could talk for 2 hours on account management and portfolio management and all that, and I don't know if that's what your question meant by, but really, when we were originally, approached and asked, to talk about this, and we looked at the win rates of the companies that that we get a chance to talk to, and you all can look at, go out to LinkedIn and look at Kevin's profile and see his history and where he's come from. When we look at the companies that are, really successful right now, and then we went and analyzed what do we think is making them successful, it really is focusing in on account management and, which is really coming back in spades now, and then the capture management. And then when you really dive, and I know, David, I don't know you personally, but by your question, it sounds like you really understand, capture. Therefore, that capture is all about gathering data and analyzing that data and then figuring out how your company, utilizing that data, can best position for that specific opportunity. And so the companies that we're seeing that are really achieving right now are those that are playing Moneyball, that are using that data, doing the analytics of it, and figuring out, okay, we win when we do this. Those are the companies that are really, that we're starting to see emerge that are being really successful. So you've got to have that data. So the reason we're attacking this particular one, because we were asked, but two, that's really where we see the best in class companies, best practices coming out.
I guess I would, to shorten a little bit, is actually we're not doing it. This is what we're seeing, right? We're seeing other people hack the capture process in a certain way. And I expect that, and I think we expect that, to only get more sophisticated hacking out into the future. So when we think the process is going to change because the tools, the data, and the technology is there for people to get value out of it. So when the Moneyball example is great, one team does it, what happens? Other teams start to take on the lessons learned and pull that in and start executing on the basis of that plan. That's what you're going to see here. So I'm not sure I would characterize it as attacking, although that's pretty fair, but it is an observation that something is really happening in the marketplace, and not just us, but you all need to be paying attention to it as well.
And Scott and David, just to not linger on this, but to close it off, I would love to have a conversation about what I see is the reemergence of account management. Real account management kind of went by the wayside during the decade of LPTA, and now we are seeing real account management come back in space. So that would be a future conversation I would love to have.
So 1 second, we started with the Q&A, and I skipped the question that we were supposed to ask everyone.
Oh.
Yes. Again, you're reminding, because we would love talking to people, and if you'd be interested in talking to people and speaking with Mick or me or somebody else about your capture management program, please feel free to say yes or no. We'll see this, but nobody else will. So we can continue with the Q&A.
So then the last question we have on here, and so please, anybody else have any questions, please submit it. So Scott asks, do you have any examples of the output? Absolutely, Scott. We'd love, that's more, we're not going to put it on, this slide or in this presentation. We don't have that. But absolutely, we'd love to be able to talk through and show you that. And it's not just the output. I mean, we can walk you through the data structure as well. We didn't want to make it an eye chart, having a database schema or an API schema or anything out there to show you. But then the output, which is specific what you're asking, we would love an opportunity to walk you through as well, because there's a ton of different outputs, because you have win probability outputs, and I know that can be a very deep and meaningful discussion, but then you have gate review outputs, you have sentiment analysis outputs. So there's a lot of different outputs along the way. But I do hope what everybody is hearing is that, one, it's data. Two, we understand the more data that you ask, the thought is, my goodness, I'm already asking my capture managers, my account managers to collect enough data. I can't ask them to collect more. That's when you should begin to leverage the ML engines that are out there to go through unstructured data that are in these documents. So utilize the computers to do what they're good at, which is the redundant, tedious task of going through these documents to extract the data and populate that. So that way you're not asking those individuals to do more, to fill that out. And then lastly, once you have all that data in place, now you can really start running the analytics. And some of it is analytics derived by companies like ours, which create, different analytics aspect. And every single day, we're trying to figure out what more of the analytics. Some of this analytics is still human being analytics, but at least you have the data for that. So we have 2 minutes left. And so before I hand it,
I'd love to, anyone who's really interested in understanding how you would take information from a meeting note and turn that into an actual quantitative or qualitative aspect, happy to have that conversation.
And Dan, I would love to have a beer with you, sir. Good to see you. It's fantastic to get to see you. And I would love to have a beverage. So with that, I have the privilege then to hand it back over to Ms. Sarah. I don't see any other questions, Sarah, unless I missed any. But I'd love to hand it back over to Sarah to take us home.
Thank you so much, Mick, and thank you, Kevin, for today's presentation, and to TechnoMile. Also, thank you so much to all of you for attending today's event. We hope you got a lot out of it. Be sure to check out GovCon Wire events, and we have a lot of great things coming up, so a very full fall. So definitely check that out, and we hope to see you at another event soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.